So just give me a word for the construct and give me a few words for the domain delineation. So how is a domain delineated? Is domain delineation conceptual or operational? We already did that. Why measure design? So if you go back to the to our steps, there is a step I added called measure design, right? Instead of going, so why do we need to design a measure? I mean, I thought we just do like strongly agree, disagree, or something. How do we design a measure? Why do we need to design a measure? And why don't we just do it and learn? You've so far talked about your construct. You've talked about delineating the domain. What's the design of your measure? Is it observation? Is it self-report scale? Is it looking at data that already exists? What exactly is the design of your measure? Let's do the following, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to name the construct, and I want you to think about the measure design, which is how are you going to measure it? There are many different ways, right? It could be observational, it could be somebody communicating to you, and so on. So how are you going to measure it? So I need to see those words. First word is your construct name, and then how you're going to measure it. My point in explicitly having this step of measure design when I wrote this is that we should not just settle for saying, you know what, I'm going to use 7-point scales or this or that. You can be as creative as you want to be in measurement, provided you validate. Okay, so you can't say I'm just going to do this and it's great. There's a book called Geography of Time, I think is the name of the book. Very well written book. And the way they measure geography of time is they look at how long it takes to buy a stamp in a post office in New York City or in Tokyo, I think, how fast people are walking along the sidewalks or pavements, in different cities and so on. So you can be as creative as you want to be, particularly with all the data that's already out there, as long as you can show that it is valid. So what are the steps in the process and why? We talked about that. And we are now talking about the importance of designing, of the measure design. And the idea there is that you can then be creative in picking a variety of different types of measures instead of just thinking in the box. Think outside the box. You can see this chapter that I mentioned in my book, where I deliberately reviewed measures from across. And what's the biggest difference, this is also in the Q&A, between 2005 when it was published and today is the amount of data you have, secondary data you have. You've got to find a way to justify it in terms of what it's saying and so on. And then we get to item generation. And the idea here is to generate a large pool of items. Okay. And so let me move forward, and I'm going to give you the scale of preference for numerical information. I enjoy, and it's a self-report. I enjoy work that requires the use of numbers. I find information easy to understand if it does not involve numbers. Numerical information is very useful in everyday life. I enjoy thinking based on qualitative information. I like to go over numbers in my mind. I easily lose interest in graphs, percentages, and other quantitative information. I don't find numerical information to be relevant for most situations. Numbers are not necessary for most situations. Learning and remembering numerical information about various issues is a waste of time. Let's go back. And I had the domain, I had the definition, I had the domain, and then now I have the items of a potential scale. And let me ask you this question, which is that is item generation operational or is it conceptual? You could certainly see that it's beginning to become operational, because think back to the definition, rules for assigning numbers to quantities of objects, right? What are those rules? I mean, they're not some grand rule. This is it. You're going to say that here are my items. They're ordered like this. Here's the response category. I'm going to administer it in silent kinds of a setting, and people are going to fill it out. That's it. Those are your rules. That's your operationalization. Those are the operations you need to perform. And therefore, we are now pretty much in the operational domain, right? And we didn't just jump into it. We didn't say, oh, here's what preference for numerical information is. Yeah, I know what it is. I'm just going to go collect data. I'm just going to see if people take mathematics courses or people like to, add or something. I'm going to figure something out. No, you said, let's define it. Let's delineate its domain. And once I delineated the domain, I could say, yeah, as I think about it and relate the domain, I see there's enjoyment, there's liking. And so that is what domain delineation is. And that is what leads us to these items. What am I saying? I'm saying that if this is the construct up here and this is the operationalization over here, you got to go step by step by step by step, step by step by step, and then finally you're into item. Oh, that looks like a human figure there. I don't know. But the point is you got to go one step at a time because you got to traverse that distance, right? And in your case, I fully appreciate you're going to have data. Often you're going to have data. But what are you still doing? You're kind of reversing from there back up. So you need to go from here to here. And if you do that, you understand how to go back from here to here as well, right? So let me do the following. Now, since we've come this far, I am now going to ask you to give me some items in your scale, or give me at least one item that I can put up, which is going to be part of your measure. So you designed your measure. I want to see one specific item in it, which is now in the operational domain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for you to write down an item in your scale, and we are going to put it up and present it as well. How do you develop an operational definition? How do you generate good items, good response formats? How do you evaluate items and purify scales? And then we're going to use an assignment for that. And one of the things to do in this is to have a lot of items that are tied to your domain delineation, right? Redundancy is a strength. And I also want to mention that it's okay to have two different small variations of an item. So you may think it's the same. I find it satisfying, let's say I find it satisfying to solve day-to-day problems. Thinking is enjoyable when it involves quantitative information. I enjoy thinking based on qualitative. I easily lose interest. Numbers are redundant. So you can even have minor variations. I enjoy work that requires the use of numbers. I like to go over numbers in my mind. I mean, they're quite different. They're different. I'm not saying the same, but redundancy is fine at this stage. Redundancy is a strength at this stage. It's okay if there's minor grammatical, variations. Why do I say that? I want to say a couple of principles here. One of them is, in the social sciences, you can design as well as you can before the fact, and you can discuss the limitations after the fact. That's all you can do. There's nobody searching for a perfect method of anything. There are just, better methods, right? And so that means before the fact, you can do what you can. And after the fact, you have to say, this is it, but here are the shortcomings. If these are the strengths, these are the shortcomings, number one. Number two, if I were to tell you, you know what, I just came up with preference for numerical information. I came up with these items. I'm done. I'm telling you that's what preference for numerical information is. I'm done. Because I came up with it, I came up with the definition, I came up with the items. What else do you want me to do? These are the items for the definition I came up with. It's very deductive, isn't it? On the other hand, I say, you know what? I'm not going to deal with domain delineation and definition. I'll just throw some items together. I will just basically, I'm not going to be worried too much. I'm just going to do some analysis within them and throw a few out. That's very inductive. And the dance between the deductive and inductive is what makes measurement and research methods so interesting. So you can say, I enjoy work that requires the use of numbers. And you can say, I enjoy work requiring the use of numbers. And it turns out that when you use requiring the use of numbers, people respond in ways that are good for your measurement. Notice I haven't defined that yet. We don't know how people respond to items. We cannot anticipate all that. So we try to be redundant at this stage. And 20 is not enough, by the way. And so this is just the 20 I ended up testing. And I had more items, but I chose these for the initial test. So redundancy is a strength. But remember, you're trying to reflect the different aspects of the domain, and it's very iterative too. You may come up with items and say, oh, wow, now I didn't realize that, basically, the importance of this is another domain, a subdomain of preference for numerical. So as you do this and put it into item form, it's a discovery process which can then feed into the conceptual. It's not purely deductive, right? So that's what I want to say. So how do you develop so these are some of the things we talked about. How do you generate? And so now we'll use the assignment and consider what you would do in going through each of these steps in order to develop a measure of your own construct. Why should each step be used? Why should the recommended sequence be used, right? And we talked about how big part of it is to traverse the distance. Big part of it is measurement error. And big part of it is there are different ways of measuring something.